Hello, very good morning to you. Welcome along to OTB AM this Thursday morning.
Definitely Thursday.
Right. Yeah, there you go. We've got a very busy show for you. I'll give you the details of what's coming up in a couple of minutes' time. We're going to be talking about sports grants again today. I realise it's not the sexiest thing in the week where we've won a Grand Slam, where Rory McIlroy is ripping it up for like the back nine yesterday, and we're all getting ready for Augusta, and there's loads of GAA stories to talk about, including the potential that a couple of inter-county squads were going to go on strike, perhaps with the blessing of the GPA at the weekend. There's just a bit of rumbling going on in the background about that. But at the same time, we have to talk about it because it's important.
Oh, 100%. I mean, we will continue to bring joyous coverage from around rugby country, as in we will be speaking to certain stars of the Grand Slam team today. So it's possible to do both, Ger, and that's what we endeavour to do on this show. Yeah,
we try and give you like a proper meal with not just the dessert.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like slopping the gruel for the starter. Hey, there is no menu, it's gruel. That's all we're giving you at the start today. It's the gruel in the shape of sports grants. Yeah. And you've got to eat it. It's good for you. It's full of protein.
No, it's better than gruel. It's like granola.
It's granola, fair enough.
It's, it's well packaged together. There's a bit of coconut oil in there, some
Greek
flaked
yogurt.
Almonds.
Yeah.
You're going to feel good after it. It might clean you out. You'll feel good after it.
I think flaked almonds is probably a very apt way of describing the granola we might be delivering this morning.
Yeah, okay, so let's tell you what is coming up. I did mention that we've got Jordan Larmour. We're also going to hear from Joey Carberry, and we're going to hear from Leo Cullen. Hussey has been out talking to Leinster at the launch of Energia Park. Is that right? Is that what it's called?
Yes, I'm going to say.
It's the new Donnybrook. And the old Wesley and old Belvedere, who also actually, funny enough, come up in the sports grant story. So that's what's that mashup question? Greatest crossover ever? Most innovative crossover ever? Meme at the moment?
I'm not quite sure.
Oh, really? It hasn't infested your timeline?
No, I'm not a meme guy. It's kind of like dipping the steak into the gruel, isn't it?
You're on Twitter, though. You don't have to be a meme guy. This is surely you've seen it. Marvel have done the greatest crossover ever thing, and like every second tweet is greatest crossover ever at the moment.
Really? I have not seen this. I clearly use Twitter for work purposes and work purposes only. I don't.
You're a wise man. Oh, and you are a wise man.
Time away.
What else have we got coming up for you on the show? I'm going to look. So John Considine is a UCC economist and has been writing about sports grants for about 25 years at this point, it seems like, and has been doing undoubtedly the best scientific research on this, pointing out that if you're the Minister for Finance, then your county does exceedingly well while you are in power, and then all of a sudden drops off a cliff when you're no longer the Minister for Finance, which would suggest that only the fact that you being the Minister for Finance or the Minister for Sport means that your county needs money that it gets from the grant. So we're going to talk about that. Gerry Hussey is a sports performance psychologist type person who's worked with the Galway footballers, the tip hurlers, the Irish boxers for a long while now, and he's going to join us around about 10 to 9 today. We'll talk with those Leinster stars, obviously, ahead of their return to action with Leinster this weekend. Robbie Henshaw is also in there, so he'll talk to Oisin about his return from injury, and loads more to come as well. Let's bring you through the back pages this morning.
OTB AM. In association with Air. Get Air Sport free with Air Broadband.
Sports grants doing the rounds again this morning. It's on the front of the Irish Examiner this Thursday morning. Politics and leaks reads the headline. Neptune go through hoops, but no funding for leaky roof. That is the Neptune chairman there that we had on the show yesterday morning. You can listen back to that podcast with Tony Lean in the Irish Examiner, speaking to him this morning, and some good images, in fact, of him going around with this bin trying to clean up leakages and trying to stop leakages in the building, which kind of puts it into very stark realisation what exactly the funds are needed for in Neptune Stadium. And it's not like it's a crappy basketball club. It's
one of the most storied basketball clubs in the history of the country.
That you could say, first of all, it would be unforgivable if it was a crappy basketball club. And you could say that the Minister for Sport would be so ignorant to not appreciate what this is. But this is Neptune Basketball Club. He points out, one of the quotes that the chair of the club says here, I may as well open the piece here while I've got it. It's on page 13, by the way, if you pick up the Irish Examiner this morning. Is that it's a roof. It should have jumped off the page at whoever examines these things. That's what Paul Barrett says, and that is essentially what I thought when I went through these documents a couple of days ago. It literally jumps off the page, well, not literally, but it figuratively jumps off the page when you're reading through these documents. It is a roof. It is Neptune basketball. It is incredible that it hasn't got the required funding after a number of efforts to try and get it done. So the Irish Examiner following up on that one again this morning. In terms of any other stories, there's not so much any other Grant leads today, but there's an interesting one on the back of the Irish Independent. It's Martin Bretney's story saying that Ryan is the favourite for the GAA's top job. So Tom Ryan, who's currently employed in Croke Park as the GAA's Director of Finance, is expected to be the man entrusted to take over from Pádraig Duffy. The role is expected to be announced this Saturday, says Bretney, and we will have a new GAA Director General by the end of the weekend.
So he's beaten Liam Sheedy and Liam O'Neill.
It seems so. It's like it seems that a certainty that he's going to accept it. That's the only thing that potentially could stop this now, is if he turns around and is like, actually, nah, I don't want this job. But I can't see why. I think it's, if you're in that position, if you've got the time, not that you've got any spare time to do it, it's a full-time job. But if you feel that you're a career-driven person, it's a fantastic job. I can't see why anybody would turn it down. So yeah.
Duffy backs O'Neill in Northern Ireland players row, naturally enough. Shane Duffy, who is one of those players who could have played for the North but obviously has decided to throw his lot in with the Republic of Ireland, has said Martin O'Neill, fair play, given that he is exactly the type of player who wants to play for Ireland and under the Good Friday Agreement terms is utterly entitled to play for the Republic of Ireland. Sexton, Ireland were fresher than England, Irish were fresher than England. He's making the point that the IRFU need praise for the fact that a bunch of Irish players had played less than half the minutes that the English players had, and then Rory gets off to a losing start. I guess if you're Rory McIlroy though, you're not too upset with what happened in the golf yesterday. So he was 5 down after 9, basically didn't start, and then tore it up on the back 9, was like just as good on the back 9 as he was in the back 9 on Sunday. So it's like, yeah, haven't lost it, still have it, don't really care about this tournament, not going to blow my wad the week before the Masters.
Maybe Rory McIlroy needs to be trailing by 10 shots going into the final day at Augusta to win the Masters. Maybe if he's trailing by 1 shot or in the mix, he's not going to win. It just seems that once his back is to the wall, he just comes out with this unbelievable performance. I didn't watch any of it yesterday, but I presume for the back 9 his putter was on fire once again.
There was one, was it 40-foot putt again? I was looking at there, and he ends up, like, he goes from 5 down to being beaten 2-1. So, you know, I think he's going to be grand.
Yeah, it's the old adage that apparently, well, according to our golfing expert Nathan Murphy, when he spoke to him on Tuesday morning show, it's just the clear head that has allowed him to putt so well that he's just stopped thinking about things. Maybe he's done the old trick of that you think of your favourite song and you sing it backwards in your head, and that way your brain goes to a completely different place, your mind is completely clear.
Go on.
And
what's this old trick that I've never heard of?
It's an old psychology trick. It's the oldest trick in the book. Think of your favourite song, try and sing it backwards, and your head is clear.
Try and sing it backwards?
Yeah, that way you're thinking about this effort of trying to do something backwards while not distracting yourself from the physical task. So obviously, if you try and
do you take a full refrain and sing that refrain?
I haven't tried it, you know.
Ever? You've never tried this thing that you think is brilliant? Go on.
Well, but I've read psychology journals, or I've seen psychology journals.
Everybody wants to know, is it the lyrics or the melody as well?
The lyrics.
And the melody.
I'm not sure if the melody is necessary. We'll get Rory McIlroy on the show and see if he's used this
Have you invented this?
Not really. I think I saw. I saw it on like Vox or Vulture or one of those trendy sites, which like is probably, or Vice or something.
While
like
you
that.
were sleeping.
Yeah, all those websites begin with a V. Actually, I've just noticed. But yeah, maybe that's it. Maybe his mind is completely clear and his putter is just swinging freely.
You're on fire today, on. Okay, Turkey shoot. It's the back of the Herald here. Maguire, I'm ready to now step into Robbie's boots for Ireland. So. It's great when people aren't media trained, but obviously somebody decided that they would ask him about Robbie Keane, and he was like, yeah. And so what happens is then you get this Sean of a new era. Whose body is that, Owen? Do you recognise that body?
Oh my God, they photoshopped Sean Maguire onto Robbie Keane's body.
Yeah.
And they've managed to put his name on it. Actually, I didn't notice the Photoshop.
I know, it looks really good. It was like, well, hang on, we've seen this before. He's also a captain, and, you know, it's a little bit shorter, I think, than Sean Maguire is, and he's doing a fairly famous pose, or the end of a fairly famous pose. So poor Sean Maguire, he's off to a flyer. It's like, be as good as Robbie Keane, or, you know, sling your hook.
Good on Sean Maguire. Good on him, like, to have that confidence to say, yeah, I can be as good as this guy, although that's probably not what he was actually saying.
I'm your man, Maguire ready to be poacher Ireland require. And then Rory meets his match in Texas. This is Peter Uline. Also, Conrad Smith. Screw you, Conrad Smith, coming over here, stealing our coaches. He was in Ireland to help announce that the World Rugby Players Union is moving to Ireland, and he was doing interviews saying, nah, he doesn't need to coach a super franchise. He can just bounce straight into the international job after the next World Cup. I mean, after he's won the World Cup for Ireland, New Zealand can beg Joe Schmidt, but at that point, we'll be offering him whatever money he wants to stay to try and defend his crown in France, where we should have been like on our own territory. So we would be beating France just to annoy them in the final, but we would be smearing their faces and their all croissants.
I will be Philip Orr, you know, and at these kind of gala dinners before the final of the World Cup, when he's like, screw you, France. But I didn't realise that the Super Rugby thing was actually up for grabs here, that it was like Joe Schmidt has to go back to New Zealand, coach a team down there, and then get the All Blacks job. He coaches the second best team in World Rugby. He is next in line to the top job in the best team for World Rugby, no? They had
that notion that they wanted their coaches to come back and coach there first, so that there would be like it would benefit the entire system in a way that David Nucifora said, we're only going to appoint a coach from within our own system. I mean, you'd have to wonder if that's necessarily automatically the best scenario either, because it rules out Conor O'Shea, whereas it would be good to have Conor O'Shea in competition with Stuart Lancaster / Andy Farrell, or some combination of Stuart Lancaster and Andy Farrell. That'd be pretty good.
Yeah, I think Joe Schmidt, if he's produced 100-page pamphlets on games against Glasgow on a Friday night, 200-page pamphlets, then I think he probably keeps an eye on who's playing well down in Super Rugby. So, to be honest, I don't think
that's going to pick it up pretty quick.
I think so. Like, obviously, being on the ground is a different thing, and seeing how the academies work and all that is different.
But then again, New Zealand Rugby is pretty self-confident, and they're like, well, you know, maybe you don't know who the fifth choice out half is at Otago.
Maybe. So I think he probably does, though. Yeah. I think he knows everything.
He can also Google it.
That is true.
There's a video he can watch.
There is that as well. He definitely has the videos. I mean, I'm sure he doesn't have any sort of Jim Gavin relationship with the national broadcaster in New Zealand. I'm sure he gets his videotapes whenever he needs them.
Did I already do Sean of a New Era? It seems like...
No, it's...
Holy shit, look. Sean of a New Era, and at least the son have got the fada on it, but... Wow, that's mental, isn't it? It's like... It's almost like the lads sat together and went, what are you doing? Yeah, we'll do that, will we?
It's almost like they're not direct competitors, as in the number one market competitor of each other.
And then my favourite headline of the day, Jose is killing football. I mean, you could have put this out there at pretty much any point from like the moment that he decided Damien Duff was actually a left back instead of a left winger all those years ago. You could have made the case that Jose Mourinho was killing football. Today's the day. Someone's finally committed to print on the back of the Mirror. I haven't actually read this story yet. Brian Roy, Dutch legend. I mean, Holland has a lot of legends, right?
As in, he's like, yeah, he's not a Dutch footballing legend. Maybe
he's Dutch legend, Brian Roy.
Maybe he's a legend in the eyes of his mates. You know the way people kind of describe people who do crazy things as a legend. Maybe that's just the description of Brian Roy this morning.
I mean, they didn't even need to use the legend there. It was like former Dutch footballer Brian Roy.
But the legend thing gives it a legendary take status, and Jose is killing football is indeed a legendary take.
I guess most people don't really remember that Brian. He was a footballer, isn't he? He must have been really good, because he's got the back page of the Mirror here today.
Yeah, or maybe when they say Mourinho is wasting his time or whatever, then maybe they think it's Roy Keane.
Yeah, they should have just done some kind of weird grammar / Roy.
Yeah. It's like Roy.
Picture of Keane big there. It was like, crossed out.
Former teammate. We move on to the Irish Times. They're leading with some more rugby again. Numbers stack up for Ireland on both individual and collective levels, while Heaslip is holding firm on right to privacy. They're going a little bit quiet around the Maguire thing. Maguire determined to take his game to the next level, which I think kind of represents his quote probably the best way yesterday. I don't think he's set out a stall to be an all-time record goal scorer for the Republic of Ireland.
No, it's the Sean of a New Era.
Oh, I'm sorry. We're going to be the Sean of a new era, and he would still probably would not surpass Robbie Keane's goal tally. The Racing Post then is leading with the Guineas build up again. Guineas hope Saxon a big monster, says O'Brien. It is indeed Aidan O'Brien's season. While the back of the Guardian leads with Jack Wilshere this morning, saying that the manager told me I could leave. Obviously, I wasn't happy with that. It's Jack Wilshere on the saving of his career, which has basically been this season, and his continued fitness. While finally, and it's an interesting one, it's an exclusive in the Daily Telegraph, Joshua's in the money. UFC preparing staggering $500 million offer to make British boxer the richest of all time. It's a Gareth A. Davies exclusive in the Telegraph this morning, and it's a good one. Obviously, the UFC looking to get involved in boxing promotions over the next couple of years. As I mentioned, $500 million could be up for grabs should Anthony Joshua take his career in this direction. He's got a year left in his deal with Eddie Hearn, and he would obviously need to leave Matchroom Boxing to make this thing happen. Anthony Joshua has been speaking kind of around this over the last week or so. Here he is speaking to Sky Sports last week.
A good scrap would be, I think the guy from Congo, he just lost recently. Big unit, that would be a good scrap. Then you've got John Jones, that would be a good scrap.
But you personally, would you be interested?
Yeah. But I'd have to obviously have a couple warm-up fights, because you have to learn the submissions and stuff. But yeah, a fight's a fight at the end of the day. So yeah, man, I'll do it.
What?
Hold on a minute.
No. He's not fighting UFC. He's just, the UFC are starting boxing and they're going to give him money to be the leader, right? What?
I would need to learn the submissions and stuff. No, that's not what they're talking about. So they basically, UFC have applied for a boxing license in Nevada, and they're hoping to get heavily involved in the sport.
Yeah.
That's included in the report today. Anthony Joshua has spectacularly missed the point linking him to the UFC.
He just saw the 500 million, went, yeah, sign me up.
UFC equals MMA, not anymore. In terms of like...
Who'd win in an MMA fight between Conor McGregor and Anthony Joshua? Who'd win?
Anthony Joshua would just probably box him.
But like,
and then that'd be game
What if
over.
he just kept missing him? Like, McGregor would kick him in the nuts. It would have to be the nuts because he couldn't reach the head, right?
Yeah. Would one of Conor McGregor's low kicks manage to floor him?
Yeah. And
then get him into the submission? Obviously, Anthony Joshua could have learned the submission by that point.
Anthony Joshua could eat him. Like, physically, there would be room for Conor McGregor inside Anthony Joshua's stomach.
And more, yeah. It's a starter. It's his gruel.
It's like Tyke Furlong and you, basically.
Basically, yeah. But except Conor McGregor is a far more trained mixed martial artist than I am.
Yeah.
But that's...
I meant the size comparison more than anything.
Okay, fair.
His ability to eat you.
I'll give you that. Yeah, Anthony Joshua could probably have...
I wouldn't give you like 5 seconds in a fight, any kind of fight against Tyke.
Well, it depends how big the ring or the octagon is and how much scope there is. He would still probably catch me.
He'd catch you straight away.
He's probably faster than me, he's stronger than me, he's quicker than me, he's more agile than me, probably smarter than me, and he's got a hell of a lot of room in his tummy to eat me, so...
Well, that's cheer you really quickly. Everybody's a bit giddy today. It's our 100th show. We hope you've been enjoying the 100 shows so far. And if you've only joined us for this one today, well, then it's not normally this bad, I promise you.
Like, in terms of who he could potentially fight, there's talks of Francis Ngannou of Cameroon, and also the former light heavyweight John Jones. Imagine John Jones versus Anthony Joshua
in a boxing match.
In any, like obviously they're not going to take each other on in mixed martial arts because John Jones could hold his own in terms of weight, like not like Conor McGregor, but in boxing it would be interesting.
It wouldn't, because Anthony Joshua's the heavyweight champion of the world. He would kill him.
Good point. That actually, your point that I kind of forgot. Stipe Miocic was also quoted in the story. He's the incumbent UFC heavyweight champion, and he told Gareth A in the story that the prospect of fighting Joshua is really appealing. You'll never guess why. He said, I'd relish the challenge. I'd love to fight him. I'm like 100% on that. It's what everyone wants to see. The biggest champions against the biggest champions across the combat sports. Not sure about that. I think you want to see the green a little bit, Stipe Miocic. I think he'll get a lot of money for that. In terms of where he could be, in terms of the overall picture of all-time boxers, Lennox Lewis is still thought to be the highest all-time earning British boxer of $84 million. So he's going to surpass that, Anthony Joshua.
In his next fight, his first proper super fight will get more than that from him.
Yeah, the Wilder fight will surpass.
Also, who cares about British? And Lennox Lewis is Canadian anyway. I mean, come on.
Fair point.
It's
he's got his eyes on Lewis Hamilton as the highest grossing British athlete of all time. That should be Anthony Joshua's target.
Hamilton getting 110 million in his next contract. That was the deal that was put forward yesterday. So, and look, it's not over yet. We'll see who ends up at the end of it all as having the most. Right, let's move on. We're going to move on to sports funding. We're also covering the story on the show last night, and you can watch that back on YouTube. Here's the UCD Professor of Irish History and Sports History, Paul Rouse, on the severe lack of playing facilities in South Inner City Dublin.
In the South Inner City of Dublin, in a population with an area of 50,000 people, there is no playing field. That is, there is actually no playing field at all. There are 10 primary schools in the South Inner City with around 2,500 students in those schools. There is not one blade of grass in any of those schools. They have no playing facilities. There's a hurling club, brilliant hurling club called Kevin's Hurling Club, based in the south inner city of Dublin. They have no field. They are currently using a field outside, slightly on the edge of their area, and they do not have a field of their own. And that's why I think there's a groundswell of anger here around the allocation. In a way, I feel a little bit of sympathy for any particular club or school who is picked out for criticism for what they have just received.
Yeah.
Because they are actually part of a system which is absolutely set up to discriminate against people from poorer areas and people who do not have access to power and people who do not have access to the people who pull the levers of power to enable them even to fill out the forms in the way that they precisely should be filled out. And that, I think that really, really matters in terms of how we run public policy. That's the first point to make.
And
the
sorry,
and
I'll let you on with your second one. Just to confirm that stat again, South Inner City Dublin, 50,000 people,
yes.
not one playing pitch in any code, or just GAA?
No GAA pitch, no rugby pitch, no full-size soccer pitch, nothing.
Right, so that was Paul Rouse speaking on the show last night. It's worth going back and having a listen to that. John Green, the Sunday Independent sports editor, was also on speaking with Joe. But for more detail on this now, I'm delighted to say we're joined by John Considine of the UCC Economics Department. John, good morning to you. How are you doing?
Good morning, Gerry. Not too bad, thank you.
This is obviously a story that you've been covering for decades at this point, and maybe it's worth putting some context on the fact that this isn't really a new aspect of this story. It's just the latest flare-up of it. Your research goes all the way back to 1997 when the sports capital grants were initiated. Initially it was lottery funding at that point, and then it became lottery and public exchequer funding. So maybe you might talk to us a little bit about how that funding has traditionally broken down.
Yeah, the National Lottery, of course, was put in place for good causes, and sport was deemed to be one of the good causes. And then the Department of Sport started publishing the grants in 1998, which facilitated us doing the research. So effectively, what we went and looked at it, as economists, where, let's say, we'd be the grey profession, dismal science, etc. So we just went and looked to see, and our argument would be, look, this would be done on an interest basis. So we said we expected that the money would go geographically to ministers' constituencies, first of all, and then the second thing, we expected that it would go to whoever was funding that, which it was coming through, as being channeled through the Department of Finance. And we found that when Jim McDade was in the Department of Sport, Donegal got the highest per capita. When he left, Donegal slid down the rankings, and he's replaced by John O'Donoghue. Then they come up, Donegal goes to the first place. Now you could argue at that stage, well, look, maybe it's just Fianna Fáil, but of course then he gets replaced by, later on, for example, with a serious amount of years, let's put it this way, Michael Ring, and let's say Mayo do quite well. So we found that there was a geographical distribution, that the money followed the minister, basically. And, now we have, I know he's from the Fine Gael gene pool, but we have a minister who is independent, and the grants are still coming under criticism. But I think there's something different about the criticism this time. It's more based on, let's say, income rather than the geographic spread, although I know the tweet and the school in question is, closely, let's say, more closely linked to the minister, etc.
Yeah, so effectively it's the point that Paul Rouse was making there, that this has become a class issue where certain classes know how to access money and funding and other classes don't.
Yes, well, class... Paul's a historian, and I'm an economist. I wouldn't necessarily put it by class. I think there is, but and I think some of the class issue is the fact that it's Shane Ross. I mean, look, Shane Ross comes across as a very different minister than somebody like Michael Ring or some of the others. It may be a reaction to an identification of him with the class area, but I'm not so sure if. On this one, I think the bigger issue here is the number of appeals and how they got missed. Now, I think Paul made a very good point about the ability, and John Green made it last night as well, about the ability to fill out these forms. John Green explained that he had to go through it a second time, and they're difficult to do. Now, these are grants were designed originally as matching grants, which means that you have to put up some of your own money. So, in other words, it helps those who already can do this. So, for example, the GAA do quite well because they have a very good social network. People stay with the GAA. It's the one club that you would have for life, and you put something back in, etc., and there's expertise in that area. So as a result, those who already have facilities, already have the social network, already have people in there, do better at these because they were originally designed in that fashion. They were designed to say, look, if you do something for yourself, so to speak, we will help you. So they were designed in that way, and they've done what it says on the tin. I mean, the bigger issue, I think, that Paul identified last night, not in the clip that you had there, but he felt that the clubs were left down by the overall governance of sport in Ireland, the politicians, and by maybe their own sporting organisations, and maybe even the local government in the area.
Yeah, there's that's a holy trinity of mediocrity that you've described there, where none of the organising bodies themselves have got a person whose job it is to help these smaller clubs fill in the forms, because that would be an immediate breakthrough if one of these governing bodies of the sports decided that they were going to target these grants, learn how the forms were to be filled in, go on a roadshow around the country and filling in the forms basically on behalf of the clubs. That would definitely help. But notwithstanding that, small local communities here are at a massive disadvantage if they don't have somebody who knows how to game the system or fill in the forms.
Correct. And I think, if you were to give one piece of advice from this, you would say to whoever's applying for these things, go and sit first of all in your local TD's office and get them to fill out the form with you. Get the help from there. You need help on these. These are fairly complicated issues, etc. You need to get help, and it means that and usually what happens is you people in these areas who are struggling to keep the club itself on the road and don't have that expertise, and maybe don't even have the people to help. And it's a big issue in Irish sport. We had a line item. We have a line item in the sports vote where it's money going to disadvantaged areas, and we funded that out of money from dormant accounts. Why not just reallocate money from other parts of the budget? Now I'll have everybody giving out about this. How you give, but reallocate money from there to the money for sport in disadvantaged areas. Just full stop. There is a line item that has been there for a while. Why not just reallocate money to that area and say this is money specifically designated for sport in disadvantaged areas?
Just explain that, will you?
So in other words, we had, if you look at the sports vote and you look at where the money goes, so what we did over time is we said, okay, we need to have a special agency for the running of the current side of sport, for the running of the day-to-day side. So we took it out of the department, and Sport Ireland is what we have now as of that. So they get funded through that line item. Then there's a line item which says we will fund sports grants to bodies, sports capital grants to bodies, and this is funded by the National Lottery funding plus some exchequer funding. So there's a line item there for that. This is the item that we're talking about now. These are sports grants, etc. Why not just take some of that money and put it down below where it says grants to disadvantaged areas? There's a line item that can be down there, and you can ring fence it for these areas. And I think that would be a better way of starting, because otherwise this process, the refinement of this process of making sure people met X, Y, and Z has come about because of improvements. These were actually improvements made because they said, we need to make sure this happens. We need to make sure this happens. So in actually trying to improve it and trying to improve the process, giving people more hurdles to jump, it's a bit like health and safety regulation. It gave them more hurdles to jump, and as a result, it gets more difficult for people who don't have that backup support of maybe an accountant in the organisation, an engineer, a quantity surveyor. If you don't have that support, the forms which were designed to weed out, let's say, bad applications, are now different. So I think you should ring fence the money and say, look, this money is specifically going for sport in disadvantaged areas, and make it a sizable amount. We look at I don't have the numbers here now directly in front of me, but it was a pittance. It was low single digits of the percentage allocated. So we should do something like that, because it's it's all very well to say, it'll wash out in this process. It will not wash out in this process. These are matching grants. These are designed to give money, I would say, to people who already have it, because you have to have the matching element. Okay, the requirement is smaller for disadvantaged areas, but it still favours those who already have. So if you want to make a decision that we need to fund sport in disadvantaged areas, which I think we should, but that's a political decision, it's not just my preference, I think you need to say, right, let's just transfer 10 million a year and start from there.
30 million a year sounds like half. Like, why not?
Well, 30, fine.
Let's...
I don't want to come on as an advocate. I'm just saying that how we could do it. It's not. It shouldn't be just my preferences. I would allocate maybe things differently to somebody else, and other people would do. But I think if we make this decision, I think this isn't it's important to realise that these sports capital grants tend to go to areas and sports that are well organised, that have a social network that can literally fill out the form, because they're, in lots of ways, they're a superb system for doing it, because effectively what the government get is they get the locals to suss out and to establish that they actually can do this sort of stuff. So they're good in that sense. But we need a way of, if we want to fund sport in disadvantaged areas, we need ways of actually just doing that in a more efficient way, that not making it a competition, etc., making it out in the open and say, look, this is what we want to fund in those areas.
Yeah, and I guess this whole thing has been sparked because of what you just mentioned there, affluent areas being favoured because they are affluent, because they have the funds to actually put down that payment and actually get the matching payment. And it's easy to use that stick to beat Shane Ross with, but I guess when you go back through the other previous sports ministers that have come in since 97, MacDade, O'Donoghue, and even when you look at finance ministers like McCreevy, who would have had a huge part in all of this as well, you don't exactly think of an area like Wesley, you don't exactly think affluent areas either, and you would wonder why a previous sports minister hasn't looked at this, the idea of matching funds.
Well, it's, I'll put it this way, it's probably closely aligned with maybe voter turnout and so forth. I have no evidence on this, but if you think about it, you're making the people do a bit of work themselves, fill out the forms, etc. You're in the background, and now you can identify with this. And now you can say, look, I helped you get money for this. If it's a group with, if it's a large group, let's put it this way, if it's a club with a large number of people, not alone do you have a large number of sports-related people, it also means you have a large number of voters. So, I don't think it's in the political interest necessarily of the minister to change this, because if you look at this controversy, the people who are benefiting from the money, and the same previously, will probably see any criticism as a criticism of them. Well, we're entitled to our share, and so I just think, if we're looking for political change there, it could be slow. And as I say, there are advantages to this scheme. Now, whether you want to reallocate money from this scheme to this sport in disadvantaged areas, and actually just say, look, this is for disadvantaged areas, I think that would be a much more efficient way of doing it, and say, look, we're going to spend 10, 30, whatever million per year, we're going to take it from this budget or that budget. Now imagine if you went and said to Sport Ireland, we're taking it from your budget, they'd be jumping up and down, no, we're doing X, Y and Z. But if we're serious, like, what we would call in economics, reveal preference, show us that you're actually serious about this stuff, show us where the money is going, and don't pay lip service to disadvantaged areas. If you want to do this, put the money where your mouth is. Yeah,
and you could actually let Sport Ireland spend the money. You could allow them to be the ones who ultimately decide how that fund is administered, because they would actually, through the local sports partnerships, have a fair idea where the most disadvantaged areas of need were and what projects might actually work. I
was just going to say that you have local sports partnerships already there. Now, again, I think we should be careful, and this is why I got into the research at the very start. My point is that, look, we look at this, let's say, differently in terms of there's less romance involved. I wouldn't presume up front. I would presume that local sports partnerships will allocate, because they're interest groups, etc., in the same manner as a minister will.
Okay.
Like, it's not as if you can't start from a presumption that the people in local sports partnerships are, wonderful and do everything in the public interest, whereas those people who get into the ministries are not. So you want to be very careful about presuming that everything will be whiter than white if it goes to local sports partnerships. I did a blog post a while back on, local sports partnerships and which local sports partnerships got money, and I think over time we'll see whether that will be subject to the same, let's say, bias. Will it follow people who have power over those things? We don't know. We'll see. It's too early to say, but I do think that is an avenue, though. I do think that's they're established now. They're up and running for a few years, and I think virtually all counties at this stage. So you now have another way of allocating this. People who are maybe closer to the ground as well, and I think it would be a very good idea. And I think, let's put it this way, it would be a good start to go through that route and say, look, this is the way we will allocate that money.
And just keep a close eye on it over a period of time to see how those biases manifest themselves. Like you bring up those biases, John, and I guess that's kind of been at the centre of all of the research that you've done, is that, like, you put it very succinctly, the money follows the minister.
Yes.
How do we stop that?
Well, you do it, I would say, look, do you want the civil servants doing this? No. I was generally speaking saying they can do a good job, although I think the biggest issue here is how come, was the amount of appeals excessive or whatever, but I would say, look, you need to give the minister some discretion. You need to give the minister some bit of, stuff to allocate, because that's just the way it is. And you've tried to constrain that as best as possible, to try to put some rules in place. But it's almost impossible, because people will find a way around it. Yesterday there was somebody on from Neptune in Cork, but before these grants came out, Bernard Allen, I would bet, if you can, Bernard, when I talked to him a number of years ago, he said he looked after the North Inner City area when he was Junior Minister in Education with responsibility for sport. So it happens. I think at best you can do is probably put in place some rules, but the biggest constraint is programs like yourself and so forth that actually highlight this for people. But I don't know if you can do much about it, because, as again was pointed out last night, was Shane Ross might be delighted. This is publicity. It's saying he looked after his area. I was on a programme with Jim McDade where he said exactly the same. He actually cited my research. He said, John Considine's research shows that I represented the people of Donegal quite well. So it's a difficult one. But, and again, we all know, as Paul Rouse said last night, people, we buy into this because when we find our local TD has become Minister for Sport, we pile in going, can we get a sports grant from you?
Sean O'Connor on the Economics of Sport blog makes the point that potentially when a minister is in this role, the more they get into their reign, the more equal their spend will be around their own county. He doesn't break it down by constituency, but by their own county. Granted, it's a fairly small sample size, because John O'Donoghue is in the role for 4 years, and that's probably the biggest sample size we have. Do you think there's anything in that the longer a minister is in this role, that the more they start to wake up and start to realise that if they continue to do this, it's just a complete PR disaster for them?
Well, I think it's more to do with the fact that you get in, you don't know how long you're going to be in there, so you look after your own immediate ones first. And if you remember, like if I'm going to allocate, let's say 100,000, or there's a grant, or there's sports facilities that needs 100,000 in my area, that means the locals have to come up with some money. So the fundraising is not easy. So let's say it takes them a while to get 20, 30,000, whatever the case may be. They're hardly going to come back in very quickly looking for more money, because it means they have to raise more money. So I think what happens after a while is, as they start spreading it out, because they realise that, look, I've looked after the locals, so to speak.
Yeah.
Now, the other, as I say, there is a rigorous system of assessment there. In fact, some people would argue it's too rigorous, because it means that you fill out stuff incorrectly and you might lose out on the grant. So there is that there. So we have that system. I just limit the discretion of the minister then to make changes.
Okay, so that's the key, really, in terms of the influence that the minister can have. If that can be limited, I mean, it's hard to understand where that is, because we all know that most power in these instances is soft power, that there won't be an email written, there won't be anything committed to print. It'll be a cup of coffee saying, that school there, they're looking for 150 grand, make sure they get a minimum of 100, and we never had this conversation.
Yes, and that's where, I presume this will come out in time as organisations like yourself and newspapers and whatever will probably do FOIs and so forth. It would be interesting to see through the appeals process this time, because it seems to be hinted at that somehow it was through the appeals process something happened. I find it difficult to get a grip on what the exact suggestion is, whether it was, it was through the appeals process that was biased as distinct from the original allocations. But yeah, as you say, it's, is it nod and a wink? And this is the point about believing that we can ever truly fix it up. We're dealing with human nature, be it on the side of the voters who want to go to the minister and say, look, MacDade, O'Donoghue, Ring, whoever looked after their people, you're not now going to look after us, you're not getting voted back in. And there's that element from our side, and equally there's, would any of this have ignited if Shane Ross hadn't sent out a tweet? So on the other side, they're looking to take credit for it. Sometimes we get politicians who try to take credit for things they didn't even do in representing large business people or other politicians. So it's just human nature, and we try to constrain it as best we can and see where we get. But there, as I said, there are simpler answers, and maybe there's a bigger debate here. And if, particularly in the area of disadvantaged, if we are serious about this, we then allocate a serious amount of money to those areas and say this is specifically for disadvantaged areas.
One last question about this before, I know Owen has one last question as well, but should private schools be getting public funding for sports facilities?
You're now into the issue is, to what they have to be available, let's say, for other uses. The question is, why not? I'll put it this way to you. When we have an overlap between public and private services, we get a problem. And it doesn't matter whether it is in sport or not. We see it in your own area, let's say broadcasting. A lot of people would argue, should RT get the amount of funding they get, or should it go to other institutions? I wouldn't say no. And the one thing, Wesley has got a bit of grief over this stuff and so forth. Let me come in with, let's say, one positive side of things. If we're going to do evidence-based policy, let's say, for example, the SRI did a keeping them in the game study a number of years ago, and when they looked at the Leaving Cert results and they looked at the sports that actually generated better Leaving Cert results, the only statistically significant ones were basketball, hockey and hurling. So maybe the minister could claim he's trying to improve Leaving Cert results. I don't know, but that's a huge issue about this public-private split. We have it in hospitals. Should consultants be allowed to be both public and private? Once you get that, there's always that danger that people can suggest it's for public interest and it's for private interest. It is a big area where we need to make a cleaner divide. But I wouldn't necessarily stop public schools, private schools, I should say, getting public money, because if they're delivering what we want, maybe there's an international rugby team or something, why should we stop that? I wouldn't necessarily say no, but it is an issue the minute you cross that public-private divide.
I was just looking, and this is my final point, at a scholarly article you wrote in 2004 alongside Seamus Coffey and Daniel Kiley, and there was one last point in your conclusions in this article that stuck out to me, and it was that the Prime Minister, the Minister for Finance, and both ministers with responsibility for sport since 1997 are perceived to be sports fans. So obviously you're talking Bertie, you're talking McCreevy, you're talking MacDade, you're talking John O'Donoghue. I'm interested to get your take on Shane Ross and his view of sport. Obviously this is the portfolio he's been given, but do you think he's a real sports fan? Do you think he's a faux sports fan? What's your take on it?
Well, I think, I'll put it this way, let's say he's not the most impressive Minister for Sport, and I think some of his gas, let's put it this way, or some of the way he carries himself probably contributes to him getting a bit more grease than he should. So whether it is telling people he's going to go over and sort out Pat Hickey, or getting the wrong names with particular sports people or brothers and so forth, he hasn't come across as a person who is more clearly identified with sport, and probably gets plenty of criticism for that. Other than that, I wouldn't go as far as some people who have made comments about him, but let's say he wouldn't be the best minister for sport. On
that note, John, great stuff. Thanks very much for joining us this morning.
All right, thank you.
John Considine there. You should Google his stuff. It's in-depth, and it very clearly lays out that the money follows the minister, and that's not the point of these funding. The whole point of this funding is to grow participation and to help sport in disadvantaged areas, and there's a bunch of other criteria, but feathering your own nest is not on that list of criteria.
Yeah, I would be very, very interested to see how, I guess, areas in Ross's own nest scored in the area of participation, as in, as we discussed yesterday with the chairperson of Neptune Basketball Club, they were scored a 0 on this area of increased participation.
Disadvantaged area as well.
Exactly. Well, that's a different story, and that's clearly a disgraceful call. But the participation one is one that can kind of come into, I guess, subjectiveness, and I would be very, very interested to see what schools around Shane Ross's constituency scored in that regard.
All right, let us move on. We'll play you this from last night. It's Liam Tolan talking about the issues arising from the Grand Slam. It's great to have some issues arising from a Grand Slam. Liam was on Wednesday Night Rugby last night alongside Eddie O'Sullivan and Joe, and they were talking about the intelligence of the Irish team compared to their dunderheaded English counterparts.
And what I really loved about what Ireland have developed over the last while is that there's an intelligence about that detail that England simply don't have. In other words, as Brian described the move that has evolved there, that the English forwards and the English backs, I don't think at this point in their journey have the intelligence to be able to say, hang on, something else might happen that we haven't prepared for. And we saw that, remember the debacle last season with the Italian breakdown. They understand the breakdown laws, and the English players, like I'm talking about again, James Haskell, like he's 60, 70 caps for England, and he's going looking to the master, the referee, help here, I don't know what to do. And I think that in all of this detail and all of this preparation, I think what's of crucial importance is the level of footballing intelligence. And you take someone like a Tadhg Furlong and you go, hang on a second, we've been watching him, and especially him and Scott Fardy in Leinster, they've been doing that all season. They're either on the ball, sucking in defenders, they're running decoys, they're asking massive questions, and then they're selecting right in the gain line, which is really, really tough for any, like I'm sure Brian would admit that for him himself as an international outside centre to do it is difficult. But ask a tight head prop to do it, and then to select the correct decision, because part of all that is Tadhg Furlong still has to make the decision who he wants to pass the ball to, depending what the England players are doing. I think there's a huge differential between rugby intelligence of what England are, where Ireland are, and I think that's one of the things that isn't being commentated on all week.
Yeah, good stuff. Always nice when you can rub it in to a gelatinous group of people and go, no, we're smarter than those guys.
It's got
all of them, especially James Haskell.
There's been 3 stages of success here.
We're getting a bit smug, are we? Are we not?
That's it. The first one was elation when we scored a try. Then there's deep satisfaction when we win the thing. And now it's complete patronisation of the English.
Come on.
Weren't they very good when Eddie Jones started?
We're like a year and a bit out from it's going to tilt over the wrong way. And then, like, as we crash out in the group stages in the World Cup, they'll be like, wow, we've been waiting 18 months for this.
But isn't Eddie Jones very clever? Fair play to him for coming over and being able to tap into the English mentality. So he's very good.
40% fitter. They look knackered.
He's very good at rugby coaching.
He is, yeah. Okay. Let's move on. Really interesting stuff from Ciarán McGeeney in the Irish News today. Cahair O'Kane is on the line to talk to us a bit about his story. Good morning to you.
Good morning, lads.
Now, I suspect that battle lines are being drawn between the people who hate Ciarán McGeeney and who think that he should shut up about stuff like more inter-county games, and the Ciarán McGeeneys of this world who actually want to see more matches played at the top level. This is kind of the culture war within GAA at the moment, right?
Sort of, to a point, but I suppose Kieran's point was that you could manage the 14 league games. What he's talking about, a double round National League with home and away fixtures, and you could manage that in the same window or thereabouts that exists at the minute for the pre-season competitions and the National League, which ticked from the start of January until the start of April, which is around about 12-13 weeks. And if you extend that sort of another week or two, you could basically play 14 week-on-week National League games, which is sort of what he wants to do. But I can understand where that point would come in. Then there'd be a break of a week or two, and then there'd be another break of a week or two, and then the next thing you're in the middle of May and the National League's not read up, and then you're into starting the championship, and it just knocks it back again rather than helping the problem.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, this would be a massive increase in the number of inter-county games, which would, let me do the whataboutery, right? What about the elitism? What about the dual player? What about the club player?
The elitism would be a problem because it is a massive number of games. When you're asking fellas 14 league games for the All-Ireland Champions, you're still talking about 5 or 6 championship games, depending on what system it ends up with. And then to ask them to play a reasonable number of club games in a season, maybe 10 or 11, and the like of Monaghan there, they would play 10 or 11 of their club league games and then play their club championship. Somebody runs on to Ulster and then all that. Somebody puts in 35 games over the course of a season, which is professional soccer sort of standard, and that's a big ask of fellas individually, those elite players. The dual player would be dead. I don't think there'd be any room for him at all. And what was the other one?
What was my third one about? I can't remember.
It wasn't about overtraining, and I think that
I didn't even get there. Yeah, no, elitism, inter-county player,
dual player.
The club player.
The club player sort of covered that in the first point. So
yeah, they're screwed basically.
They're screwed to a point. Like the idea that clubs would have their players for club league games is sort of, it's hanging on by its fingernails in some counties. There are some counties, particularly up here, that are very good at it. Monaghan, Rowan, Derry come to example, but there are other counties around the country. I mean, Dublin, as Johnny Cooper said last year, he only played 4 games for his club in the entire year, and I imagine 2 of those were championship games. So, there's where you're at with that, and it certainly wouldn't improve that situation. But then that's something that'll never be improved unless the rules are changed, and that counties are made, put their club players up for selection for a minimum number of club games through the year, which would be, the way of solving that problem, but very hard to police.
I often wondered, is there a set number of games that is a target for a GAA player? For, say, an inter-county player, what is the target number of games that they should play over the course of 12 months? And I'm including club matches in that. It
differs per individual. Like there was one case in Ulster here. I remember a fella who spent 2 years on a county panel and basically played 3 games across those 2 years because he wasn't getting any game time with his county team. And he wasn't then allowed to play for his club, and it just became a mess to the point where he sort of packed it in, and that's the very, very far end of the scale. There are some players like Chrissy McCaig from Slackneil would play every week if he could. He would play every single week and play football on a Wednesday and play hurling on a Saturday. So it does depend on the individual. But
should we have a target in mind, like a general? And agreed. So if you agree that, like, I'm looking at the Leinster Senior League tables, I just looked them up there while you were talking, and Major 1 Saturday, the league table from last year shows that the teams played 22 games. 22 games seems like a fairly active, regular, it's going to be on every Saturday, whatever time those games are on. Like, and then there's obviously cup competition on top of that, so you might play another 5 games if you reach the final, you might play 1 if you get knocked out. So a range between 22 and 30 games a season seems like a really active, vibrant lifestyle, which I think most players would like, right?
Yep, absolutely, and that's one of the points Kieran McGinney makes, that introducing more National League games and tightening it up a wee bit would basically reduce the training to games ratio that exists at the minute, which can be as high as 6 or 71 in some cases. Where you're training constantly and not playing games, or higher if you're on a subs bench every week. you would want the players to have that bit of freedom to play for their clubs when it's available. But I suppose, as you say, a target of in around like the counties up here, if you have 15 club league games, a sort of accepted figure would be around about 2/3. If they're playing 2/3 of those games for their club, they're naturally going to miss games because it's inevitable. It's impossible not to. But if you were getting 11 or 12 club games, and in Kieran's idea, 13 or 14 inter-county games maybe across the year, there's 25, 26 over maybe 9 or 10 months. That does seem very acceptable. I'm sure most players would prefer that as to training for 10 months of the year and playing 6 or 7 league games and maybe 2 championship games, which is not a great return for the effort that goes in.
McGeeney also makes the point about other sports stealing the limelight for GAA, and then he also goes on to suggest that you could potentially end the championship in July. Now, I know somebody like Colm O'Rourke is very dead set on keeping the football final in September. Obviously, it's gone to August already, so that thing is dead from now already. But do you subscribe to the idea that this is potentially a contradiction for McGeeney, that moving the All-Ireland final forward again could reduce that window when GAA is really in the public spotlight?
I could see the point in terms of, the real major focus on those big All-Ireland games at a particular time of year is very useful for the GAA. But at the same time, I do feel that those games would kind of sell themselves, because the percentage of the population in Ireland that's involved and interested in those big games, All-Ireland semi-finals wouldn't really need sold in August any differently from July or the end of June. To me, an All-Ireland final would sell out no matter when it was played. And I suppose it comes down to whether the club game, as it is at the minute, gives the GAA enough promotion. And I think through the like of, the AIB's efforts and different things, and TG Cahair obviously showing a lot more of it and giving it a wider profile, the club game has caught up in terms of profile, and the like of the provincial club series and the All-Ireland club series offer good promotion for the GAA, but it wouldn't be on the level of a senior All-Ireland. But it's probably, to me, I think it would be enough. You're maintaining a presence, you're maintaining a media presence on TV, in the papers, on radio all year round. At the minute, if you bring it inside a calendar year, it would still be all year round. So I don't think it's as big. I know Croke Park are obviously naturally concerned by bringing the All-Ireland forward, and it is a move that they maybe didn't necessarily want to make, but it'll be interesting, because I don't think it'll have a massive impact, certainly in terms of participation. Ultimately what you're talking about is participation levels. That's who you're promoting to engage young fellas in games. And are a lot of young fellas not engaged by their own club players, like a Chrissy McCaig, him playing at Emmett Park and Slackneil? Does that not engage fellas every bit as much as Dublin and Kerry would for a young fella in Derry or Tyrone?
I mean, it does. But the trouble is that Chrissy is like a Cuchulainn Satanta type figure, and there aren't a million of them.
No, there aren't. Definitely not. But a lot of young fellas, like I understand, like a lot of young fellas dream of playing for their county and grow up, and that's massive. But a lot of young fellas, like, you're brought up by your club, and this is the community you're from, and you grew up wearing that jersey. You grew up, that's actually your community, that's your club and your crest, and you grew up wanting to play for them as much. And I think that that is part of the promotion of it as well. That the argument of taking it out and shortening the inter-county calendar and taking away from the promotion of the games, who are you promoting it to? It's already promoted to the young fellas by the games being played on their own doorstep.
I have a theory about this, that like, if you are a young footballer from any county in Leinster outside of Dublin, that the thing that's going to sustain you is playing for your club. That the dream of playing for Kildare, Meath, Westmeath, Longford, Offaly, Laois is not a dream of winning the All-Ireland, because it is completely irrational. Whereas actually the dream of winning the county title is going to be the only thing that sustains you. And whether or not that's good enough in the long run to make sure that the best athletes at 14 and 15 choose Gaelic football over rugby, we'll have to wait and see, because there's a powerful intoxicant in watching the success of the rugby team at the moment. And I think that's McGeeney's point, is that there can't be complacency when it comes to recruitment of the best players, and that the club system has to prove itself to be a fertile recruitment ground for those players, and to keep those players involved by giving them a programme of games that keeps them enthusiastic, and by offering them the opportunity to express themselves as star footballers, or as footballers who are part of a community and enjoy it.
Yeah, that's a fair point. You know, I've been working on a piece for a couple of weeks on the dropout rates in inter-county football and how they compare now to 10 years ago, and they're kind of holding up all right. And it's interesting. I spoke to the Cavan manager, our former Cavan manager, Terry Hyland, about it, and he spoke about that success. You know, needing success to keep fellas interested in any county. And he said, you know, it's not the majority. The majority of players, all right, they'd probably love to walk away with a medal, but it's not the only concern they have when they're playing for their county. It's the pride. It's the personal, maybe a personal gain or a personal pride as well. And playing for your county, so there's more to it than simply winning medals. But I absolutely take the point that, and as Terry Hyland says, for a minority, that there is that absolutely. When you go 3 or 4 years where you don't make an Ulster final or you don't get anywhere near it, and you start to think, you know, this is never going to happen. And by year 6, you're gone. You're 27, and you're retired from inter-county football effectively, and it is happening more and more. And you maybe are losing a percentage of you naturally are losing fellas younger because of the commitment involved now, and it's becoming trickier to keep them. But they naturally gravitate when they finish under county football. They naturally gravitate back towards their clubs, and I think the interest and the want to play for their county will still exist, as you make the point of the counties around Dublin and Leinster. And maybe long term, absolutely, if Dublin keep winning Leinster and keep winning it, and in 15 years' time they're still winning it, then this generation of young fellas will have said, you know, this is not for me to be playing for Offaly or for Kildare or whoever. But as it stands, I think it's on solid enough ground. But obviously that's the argument over the tiered championship. Like, I spoke to Armagh fullback Brenton Donaghy the other day, and the line he used was the thought of a B championship turned to stomach, which, you know, he says nobody grows up wanting to play in a B championship, and basically the idea was an insult to players from every county. So you imagine, I know, but that's the mentality. You know, Armagh are Division 3 at the minute. They haven't won Ulster since what, 2000 or 99, or sorry, mid 2000s. You know, but that's still their mentality, that they believe that they can compete with anybody, you know, 10 years since they've actually won anything. So, and what I find talking to a lot of players is that's the mentality of a lot of them. You know, even, you know, we would chat to a lot of fellas in Antrim here, and spoke to Patrick McBride a few weeks ago, and he said, you know, he would rather have that one chance of getting a second round qualifier draw against Mayo in Castlebar maybe some year in the next 10 years than he would want to win a B championship. So I suppose that's the GPA's point, that the players need to listen to, and Pádraig Duffy's point has been that the players need to listen to, and when you do listen to them, I think there is a consensus that they don't really want it.
Just one last point on that, and it's kind of on the powerful intoxicant point that Ger made previously, just around the Grand Slam and stuff like that in rugby. Like, the only kind of thing you could equate to that in GAA really is big days in Croke Park. And I take your point that the participation rates are impacted by seeing lads in your own club doing well for the club. But is there not a kind of a sense about a widespread hysteria in a county when they're going to Croke Park and they're about to win something, and potentially in a football competition that replicates the Joe McDonagh Cup, there might be more potential for that in weaker counties? And of course there is that progression, and it comes back to this idea that the B Championship label is the thing that is wrong with this the most. But I still think there's a huge room for this, for counties from weaker areas to actually get to Croke Park, to have some sort of end goal that is providing that intoxicant for the young kids going along to Croke Park. I would
kind of arguing the opposite. I have always kind of been in favour of splitting the championships, because the idea of some of the counties in Division 4 winning in All Ireland is completely unrealistic, and to give them something to work towards. But you only need to look, for me the prime example is the Division 3 and Division 4 National League finals last year, which were in Croke Park. You know, counties that don't often maybe get to play there, don't often win silverware, and I think the total attendance was 5,000. You know, and that is ultimately the bottom line for a lot of those counties. The absolute fear that they're going to end up playing their championship games in front of 700 or 800 people. Whereas no matter how the last year went or how the last 10 years have gone, we're still hopelessly romantic in the sense that you always hope, and your fans always hope that you might do it this year. We could take Armagh, or we could take Tyrone, and they turn out in their thousands, and there's 15,000, 16,000 at every championship game at least up here, and the big fear is that would disappear because the promotion of the games, you put Dublin and Mayo on the same weekend as you put Armagh and Fermanagh, and which gets all the media coverage, which is covering pages and radio stations and TV for the week running in, and which is live on TV. This is the fear that those counties have, and I can absolutely see why they have it.
Yeah, I think there's ways around that. We're going to talk about this a good bit more next week in terms of a suggested structure for how a championship/league might work, but we'll definitely bring you a bit in on that conversation. It's great stuff with McGeeney, by the way. My whataboutery notwithstanding, I was being totally facetious about that. I think it's really interesting when somebody like McGeeney comes out and makes the case for more inter-county matches, that actually this would help to rebalance it, and he's very interesting on how people outside the system don't really understand that the training is actually enjoyable and that the players aren't indentured slaves. I think McGeeney might have had a few people in mind when he was talking to you specifically.
Possibly. Who uses phrases like indentured slaves?
Well, there you go. Cahair, good stuff. Thanks a million.
Thanks, lads.
You can read that stuff in the Irish News this morning. Look, it's a debate, right? The B Championship and the hatred of the B Championship that the players have. There's a way of fixing that and still having a tiered structure. It's not that complicated.
To have your shot at glory, your whatever, 5,000 to 1 shot, while also having a chance to win something in the same championship would be good.
So people not showing up to the league finals last year, it's because the games don't mean anything. Like, what's the difference between a Division 3 title? There's no benefit to winning that match ultimately.
The most important thing happened the week before that when they got promoted to Division 2.
Precisely, yeah. So like ultimately that silverware, there's no value to it, there's no incentive to win it. Sometimes you might actually be in the middle of a training cycle for a championship match. By that stage you hadn't planned on having that game.
Yeah.
Like you planned on getting promoted, but that's like we'll pick the B team or we'll try some lads out. So remove those games because they're pointless. Or give them some meaning by implying something like you'll have an extra home game next year if you win this match in the division that you get promoted to. But anyway, we'll definitely...
Yeah, just one last. It's a good point that he makes at the end there, just about running these games concurrently, that if you do have a B Championship running at the same weekend as Dublin against Mayo or any game, it's going to get completely dwarfed in terms of coverage.
Well, you can insist that your broadcast partners show those games. So as part of the deal, if you've got the rights to Dublin and Mayo, you have to show Fermanagh Tyrone.
That doesn't mean it's going to manifest itself in the press, though, in terms of build-up, in terms of the excitement that's around these towns in the build-up to big championship games. And you look at somebody like Down last year, for example, making the Ulster final, and Stevie Poacher on Tuesday telling us that would probably be a B Championship side in this day and age. And Down got their day in the sun, despite the fact that they got beaten comprehensively in that game and beaten comprehensively in Croke Park as well. But they still had that odyssey of sorts that is possible. And I don't think it's about the chance of winning something. It's about the chance of going on a journey in the summer that really matters to a lot of supporters.
Yeah, and removing that would be a mistake. Anyway, OTB AM is brought to you this morning with Ayr, the home of Ayr Sport. You can get amazing live sporting content for free with Ayr Broadband. So let's move on to the rugby. Energia Park is the new name of the stadium in Donnybrook. Oisin was down there at the newly renamed Energia Park. Here he is with Jordan Larmour.
Well, here with Leinster and Ireland's Jordan Larmour. Jordan, first of all, talk to me about the last couple of weeks. It's been phenomenal for you, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's been a pretty crazy few weeks so far. The Grand Slam and everything leading up to that was a huge week. I suppose there was a lot of hype throughout the week, and we knew at the start of Six Nations what our goal was, and it was to win the Grand Slam. So just to see the work that the boys put in and then just to get the result is very satisfying.
If I told you at the start of the season you'd be part of a Grand Slam winning team, you'd come off the bench at Twickenham, you'd be a big part of it, you'd get game time, what would you have said to me?
Yeah, I wouldn't have believed you, that's for sure. No, it's been a mad year so far. I sat down at the start of the year just writing out my goals, and it was to start for the Leinster A team, maybe get a few caps for for Leinster in the Pro 14, and then fast forward a few months and part of the Grand Slam winning team. So it's crazy to think about it, but I'm just loving it at the moment.
And at what point did you start to think this could be a reality here? Was Joe giving you calls? Did Joe say, look, you'll be in on the wider squad in January when we get together for the Six Nations and get together for the November series and all that? At what point did you start thinking maybe, just maybe?
I suppose when I started kind of finding a bit of form, Munster game, the Ulster game, but Joe never called me or anything like that and told me I was going to be involved or anything. I just put the head down and kept working and just hoped, I guess, that I'd be involved in the Six Nations squad somehow. And so when I finally did find out, it was brilliant.
Yeah. Now, talk to me about the aftermath of the Italy game, because Brian O'Driscoll said this: as a young player, you're always going to pick up things that you can learn. There's always something that you can pick up, and he said as an older player that's the case as well, but maybe more so as a younger player. What did you learn from that Italy game? What were the kind of conversations you would have had with Joe and Andy and the coaching staff afterwards?
Yeah, definitely. I think you never really stop learning, do you? And of course, like, I'm only starting out now, I'm young. I'm going to learn new things and pick up things along the way and make mistakes. So it's just how you learn from those mistakes and don't let them happen again. But yeah, just talking to Faz and Joe just about just defence and just what can I do better, work-ons and things like that. That's probably really what we just talked about, just work on and get better.
Yeah, and then you come off the bench against England. What's the instruction going on in Twickenham?
I suppose just kind of fit in first. Joe would be big on that. If you're coming off the bench, just fit in first. Don't do anything too crazy. Just do the basics well. And when I came on, like, having Gary Ringrose inside me made a big help. Just gives you, he's just so calm, and it's infectious. Everyone's just calm and knows their role, and the clarity is very good. So when you come on, you're just ready to go. You prepare throughout the week, so you're ready to go on when you're called upon.
What was it like being in the centre there? Because a lot of people, when they saw you coming on, just assumed Keith would go into centre, you go out to wing, but that's not what happened. I mean, you were trusted with the centre position. That's a I won't say a big leap of faith, because Joe knew what he was doing, but it's a I suppose a big compliment to you and a big statement.
Yeah, I've played centre throughout my whole school career, I guess, but I'd never played at that level and that kind of, like, the magnitude of the game. So during the week, I didn't really run at 13 too much, because we thought Keith Earlsey would go into centre if I had to come on, but that wasn't the case. I was slotted into centre, and as I said, like, the boys around me gave me a big help and gave me confidence, and so when I came on, just tried to fit in and just do the best I could.
There was that bit where he gets the ball and the try line is there, and you're like, is he going to get the bonus point try? It just gets hacked down about 5 metres short, but there is definitely that sense of the whole crowd was like, what's going to happen? And I can't wait until he does it in an Ireland shirt.
Yeah, but the only
Coming.
thing, it's coming, yeah. Where he's making the likes of Robbie Henshaw look like a seasoned veteran at this stage, which he is, but kind of an old man at this stage almost. And like the pecking order isn't just
there's no pecking order anymore.
Well, yeah, it's not just the likes of Rob Kearney and Johnny Sexton leading the way. There's suddenly a new pecking order there, and maybe if Ross Byrne develops into the player that some people expect him to develop into, he's looking at Joey Carberry ahead of him, and maybe Jordan Larmour's looking at Joey Carberry ahead of him as well for the 15 jersey. That there's a new pecking order after developing, and a new depth chart after the Six Nations for sure.
Yeah, Oisin also caught up with the Leinster head coach Leo Cullen and asked him what is Larmour's best position.
Jordan just wants to play, I think, is the thing about Jordan. I've seen him play all across the back line. So, he started off in pre-season, he played a bit of 15 for us. Then he actually played in the centre as well in one of the games, just briefly. Started the first Pro 14 game against Dragons away on the wing, and then played a bit of 15 as well, and obviously shifted into the centre for Ireland and played on the wing. So he's incredibly versatile, but he's a very instinctive footballer as well. So it's interesting to read some of his bits, talking about like what his aims for the season, about trying to play a couple of A games and maybe a couple of the games for the senior team as well. So he's what he's gone through has been incredible. So for him, he's just someone who comes in, though. He's he comes in, works hard. He's in the thick of everything, which is great to see. Is what you want from the players, to come in, enjoy themselves, and try and give their best selves every day.
And it's interesting for someone like Joey Carberry. I mean, winning a Grand Slam, but potentially might be a first teamer in his own club, given the form of Johnny, given the form of Rob. You know, it's an odd one, isn't it? So is it hard to give him the game time he wants, the game time he needs? And I appreciate before the Six Nations he had an arm injury, so you couldn't anyway. But is that again a debate? Is that kind of something you have to balance? How do you decide that? What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, it's good that we have a good competitive group. I think, you know, because competition, I think, drives performance. So like Joe, he's been fantastic for Leinster, and, you know, I think the exposure that he's got with Ireland during this tournament is going to be unbelievable for his development as well. So, you know, he's had his windows along the way, how he, you know, managed the game towards the end. At the weekend, he looks like a constant threat on the ball as well. So Joey's picking up bits of experience all the time. As you say, he picked up an arm injury, and like, that's just the nature of the game as well, because you know there's going to be injuries at various different times. And, you know, similar to Jordan, he's got a bit of versatility in his game, whether he plays at 10 or 15. You know, Joey's going to be a huge contributor, hopefully, to Irish rugby and to Leinster rugby over the next couple of seasons. So, he's another hugely exciting talent.
Yeah, but in what position, that remains to be seen. Let's hear now from Robbie Henshaw as well, who's also speaking with Oisin here. Keep an eye on the advertising, and also the first question is about his injury and an update on that.
Yeah, it's going really well at the moment. 5 weeks into it now, so it's kind of a week-to-week focus. To be honest, it's definitely improved now the last few weeks, and I'm kind of on the good side of it now. So just getting back and doing all the rehab exercises and getting into the gym and building it back up is the priority. So it's definitely all positive at the moment.
And you've survived many attacks in your time as a player. I'm not sure you've ever survived one from a sponsorship board. Talk to me about your memories of it, and as soon as you did it, did you think, oh, I'm in trouble here, I could be out for the season, or what were you thinking?
Yeah, it's obviously a tough one when you score a try and you're unable to kind of get to your feet. Thought straight away something wasn't right. And obviously felt the physios come on and they knew straight away. So tough one to take, because you don't know what the damage is and if your season's done or what's going to happen. So the positive thing is I don't think I'll be out for the rest of the season, which is always great. Taking an injury, you know, because if you're ruled out of the season, it's kind of a blow. It's a shock to the system. But if you have a target to come back for, it's great, and you can work towards that.
Now, you've played your part in Ireland capturing a Grand Slam, and a massive part as well, but was it strange watching the last couple of games, especially the one in Twickenham, especially the one last Saturday? I imagine it was kind of bittersweet, was it?
Yeah, a little bit. It was definitely, I was looking at it from a different perspective. It was great to be kind of there on the sideline with the lads. I watched it from the subs bench, and kind of the feeling after was I was unbelievably proud of how they rolled their sleeves up and got to work. And you know, there's only a couple of teams in the world that can go to Twickenham and pull a performance like that. So I was unbelievably proud of the lads. But I think from watching it from the stands, it was obviously it was hard. You want to be there, you want to try and be involved in those type of games, but that's sport, unfortunately, and you have to take the highs and the lows.
Were you able to celebrate it, or was there kind of a, God, I wish I was on the field? Because look, it would be only natural that you might think that, but like ultimately, if you celebrated, of course you should have celebrated. Of course you were right to do that.
Yeah, I did. I went into the change rooms with the boys, and obviously was out and got presented with the medal on the pitch. But had a beer with the lads afterwards and just sat down and just had chats with them. You want to be kind of in the players' shoes, kind of who've just come in from the game, and you're just coming in. You take a breath of kind of celebration and. You know, it's kind of hard to believe when you're in that kind of position. But there was plenty of champagne being sprayed around the change room. There was sing-songs. It was just an unbelievable atmosphere, and a really good atmosphere to be there and be part of.
And I think the point has been raised in the last couple of days. In 2009, it might have been, if not quite an ending point, it was a big mark along the road for that team and that squad. And they wouldn't have used as many players even back then, whereas for this squad it feels like it's kind of maybe the start of something rather than the ending of something. There seems to be a hunger for more, and a lot of guys have got game time, a lot of guys have got a taste of it, and that can only be a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the manner in which the competition played out, that we used a lot of players, and there was a lot of chopping and changing due to big injuries happening in the team. I think the way in which the lads just stepped up, and there's a lot of pressure piled on the new guys who came in, but I thought they took it in their stride, and it was unbelievable to see that, because it's any player that plays in the Six Nations, they know that it's a step up from your Novembers, a step up from your Champions Cup games. I don't think you can kind of match it in terms of any other competition in the world.
Oh, the two most professional men in the world. Congratulations to the two lads for getting through that. We didn't.
Speaking of memes earlier, that's like the dog with the hat who's like, this is fine, as his house is going up in flames. That was Robbie Henshaw there, who's being attacked by whatever they call it, pull-up.
An energy pull-up. It was good branding though. fair play to us.
In your face.
Just suddenly putting the hand out there. And then Robbie Henshaw, in fairness, did the same thing, and they just kept going. So yeah, good job, lads. Right. We've had a lot of comments in about the sports funding, a bunch of tweets about this. Mick Foley from the Sunday Times has been in touch to say, interesting how the Wesley case has flared this topic up again. I'd say there's been commentary and articles on these anomalies every year since the noughties, but the way most politicians use sport, making the system less political, would be like turkeys voting for Christmas. Basically making the point that it's not going to happen. Joe O'Shea, the journalist, says, it was striking that Ross was happy to announce it on social media, wouldn't even consider that it might get a negative reaction. Sure, that's just how it works. And then, obviously, the point that John Considine was making earlier about Jim McDade basically bragging about the research that John Considine had done, pointing out that Jim McDade was giving all the money to Donegal. It's like, they're delighted.
Yeah.
Shane Ross is delighted that everybody goes, oh, you're giving the money to Wesley. It's like, woohoo! Which means that if he gets back in government the next time, all the local clubs are going, let's vote for Ross because he might be the Minister for Sport, he might give us 150 grand. It's like, this is the way the gravy train works, and we're all complicit in it because, as John Considine points out, local man / woman, always a man so far, gets the gig as Minister for Sport. The first action isn't, oh, this is good for the country. It's, what does this mean for my local club? How much money can we milk from the system?
Yeah, completely, and that's kind of the democratic society we live in, that is the way people think. And I guess the most iconic moment of this sort of localised building of facilities is John O'Donoghue when he lost his seat in the Aura Leisure Centre in Killarney. And I can't remember the exact quote, but it is very famous, when he's like, oh, I'm so sorry to have lost my seat in this hall that I built.
Isn't it ironic that in this hall that I built?
Yeah. Yes, that was it. But yeah, exactly. So the fact that he's pointing it out as irony is just kind of shows exactly what sort of impact this is having on the politicians themselves. And if you think Shane Ross is feeling any shame about this, well, you're wrong, basically. He is probably kind of licking his chops thinking about that next general election, and it can't come soon enough.
Yeah, no. Well, as long as, he's qualified for his pension already at this point as a minister. Not that he needs it. Not that he needs it at all, but, no one's going to turn down that extra 120 grand a year, or is it 200 grand a year?
You never have enough money, Ger.
Whatever the pension is. Right, that's our last rugby for you now. We're moving on to Gerry Hussey. He is an Irish performance psychology consultant who's worked with a number of Ireland's leading teams and athletes. We're going to leave you today with that conversation, and we'll see you tomorrow. All right, so Outdoor Revolution is, this conference is on at the RDS this weekend. It's on Saturday and Sunday from 10 o'clock until 5:30. There's a range of brilliant speakers speaking at it. So Joe Brawley, Sean Kelly, Stephen Hunt, Ross Purcell, David Gillick and Jesse Barr and loads of others are either giving classes or giving talks. Also giving a talk is Gerry Hussey. He's going to be there on the Saturday and the Sunday, and he joins us now. Gerry, how are you doing?
How are you doing? Thanks for having me.
So I was going to say you're a sports psychologist, but then I find that giving people labels that they haven't told me to give them is a bit reductive. How do you describe yourself?
Yeah, I suppose in recent years it's difficult because I focus everything on mind, body, spirit. So I have studied psychology, but I've also studied philosophy, theology and personal strength and conditioning. And what I try to do is look at and energise people from an integrated point of view, mind, body, spirit. And I believe that, like in a team we talk about spirit all the time and we know the importance of it, and it's no less important in an individual. but yet we all know where to go to build our physical well-being. We all know how to build our nutritional well-being. But for me, the mind and spiritual well-being is something that I think we neglect sometimes. And for me, if part of your soul is not ignited, not at its best, the outer physical muscle is almost redundant at that stage.
Let's come back to that, because it's obviously a fundamental in terms of your belief system about how this whole thing should work properly. But where did you start? How did you end up getting involved in thinking about making teams or individuals better performers by helping them to train the mind?
I think it was growing up. I grew up in a west of Ireland, typical small house, 8 kids, mum and dad, 10 of us in the house. We all lived in the same house, we ate the same food, we had the same parents, went to the same school, and yet we all, from an early age, became very different personalities. Some of us loved sports, some of us hated it, some of us were good at music, some of us. So I realised that all the external stuff, the food you eat, the school you go to, the place you come from, while they play a role, they don't determine who you are and what you're capable of. That there's something inside that starts to come out. There is something that we're born with, and it's in that inner spirit, or that inner spark of light, and it just wants to come out. And when you see somebody who is doing what they were born to do, it's just effortless, and it just flows. And when you see someone living a life who's not doing what they were born to do, who has abandoned a childhood dream, who is dislocated in terms of time and space, you just look at the lights have gone out. So for me, I became aware very early in life that food and education and the school you go to, they play a role, but ultimately there's something deep inside of us that is craving to come out, and when you can capture and harness that in someone, they become unstoppable.
There must have been something about your environment that was a little bit different, though, because while you say that you might have that ability inside yourself, quite often it's very possible for environments like those that exist in the west of Ireland to completely suppress those things, and more often than not that can be very successful in certain parts of rural Ireland. So do you really believe that can actually come out in everybody, or is the power of suppression from certain environments too strong?
I think it is. I think it's two things. I think it's like everything else. If we have an external weather condition, storm, wind, and a single glazed window, the likelihood is at some stage the window's going to give, and then the external conditions fill in internal environment. I was lucky. I was born, I suppose, with parents who always told us, do what you love. And when I would be thinking of making a decision, or stop playing football and trying to commit to boxing, or trying to do something different, the only question my parents would ask us, does it make you happy? Are you happy? So I think I was given the freedom of trying new things. My dad used to always say, no effort is failure. So the idea is that once you've tried, once you put your heart and soul into it, there's no possible way you can fail. But also think it the other way. No effort is failure. To not do it, to not dare, to not, well, you failed already. So that was the environment. But I was lucky growing up, I suppose, that I realised that, that we all have this glass, be it single pane or double pane, but unless we do something on a daily basis, so with all my clients, I work on this code calendar of daily events. You have to develop your own sense of resistance and resilience to the outside world. Otherwise, everybody's opinion becomes my opinion. Everybody's thoughts become my thoughts. And then people describe their own inactions or their own mindset, and they attribute it to the society. That's just the way society is, or that's just the way the world is. But our choice is ours. It always and will be. My mindset, my thoughts, my emotions are mine. Nobody else has the ability to impact those unless I'm willing to surrender them. And that happens sometimes without us even knowing it, just because if it's almost like a cliff. In the Aran Islands and the beautiful Ring Fort in Doonangus is a beautiful example of even granite rock can get worn away, eroded by nature. So our confidence, our ability, our dreams and our spirit can become eroded if we don't have something that we do on a daily basis to replenish each of those.
You've worked with the Irish boxing team. How do you get that message across to the young lads who are coming through for the first time? Because it's a complicated enough message. Mm-hmm. And this might be their first exposure to thinking about themselves as something other than just a fighter who's here for the afternoon to get a bit of coaching. How does that work? What's that process like?
I think for everybody, you have to remind them. So me, I don't give anybody anything. I've never given any athlete anything that they didn't have already. My job is to remind them what they were born with. So we're all born with the human spirit, and because we have the human spirit as a child, we're ambitious. Nobody tells us we have to walk. We have that inner drive to get up and learn. We fall, but we get back up. We're resilient. We learn fine motor skill extremely fast. We learn language fast. We have this immense brain to take in, to understand, to process, to recreate. We have this inner resilience. And something happens as we go along, and sometimes it's school, sometimes it's an external voice. Something erodes that sense of spirit. So the first thing I do in any athlete is I get them to remember a time that they're at their best, most confident, most assured, most free. And by me, we replicate that through visualization, through memories, and through different cues. We replicate that, and you reconnect them with their best self. You reconnect them with that spirit and that energy. So for me, you don't have to complicate the message. You simply remind people that this is what we have. And people talk about spirituality, or how do you bring that to athletes? It's very simple, because in sport, above anywhere, we talk about spirit all the time. But let's define it. Let's bring it out. Let's bring it alive. And for me, an ignited spirit where people are deeply committed and connected to each other, or if you want to say where people deeply love each other, an ignited spirit overcomes muscle. It overcomes anything every day.
So obviously this is in dealing with high performance athletes. So you're telling them to try and rekindle the time when they were at their best, but that doesn't necessarily make that a time when they were at their best athletically. Mm-hmm. It's when they were at their best maybe in terms of self-confidence. Would I be right in saying that? And that ultimately does help performance because of a positive mindset. Yeah. My question essentially is, how does it impact it in terms of high performance athletes, and how does it manifest itself?
Well, I think every single athlete in the world that I've met is a human being. So when you're talking about human dynamics and human psychology and human spirituality, it's applicable to athletes, to presenters, to psychologists, to everybody. And when someone steps onto a line, or steps into a ring, or steps over the whitewash into the pitch, and their sense of humanity, their sense of inspiration, their spirit is alive, everything becomes easy. Then they can implement game plans, tactics, make good decisions. But if somebody's mind is full of game plans, tactics, structures, and their sense of spirit, their sense of humanity is diminished, it's just not going to work.
Do some people not benefit from that, though? The idea that their head is full of game plans and that they work in that sort of way? Are some people a lot more resistant to this way of thinking?
No, well, I mean, I can only speak from my own opinion, and people like process cues, people like process goals, and absolutely you have all of that. But for me, when you go into a dressing room 10 minutes before the game, and the coach and everybody has said all they can say, and there's nothing more to be said, you walk in that dressing room and you look into people's eyes, and you know, and I've known days when nothing was going to beat us, and I've known days where you look into someone's eyes and you just know it's not going to happen today, because that spirit just wasn't there.
It's explaining the why to people. So why are we going through all this? Why are we trying to achieve the thing we're trying to achieve? And once you've got that grounded in somebody, then they can go and learn all the other stuff. That's the order of it, really?
That's exactly it. And for me, the best example of that is in the dressing room, half-time, big game, everything's going wrong, we're having real issues and lots of stuff, and then half-time quickly is about breakdowns and tactics and collision speed, and all the numbers have been pushed out, and then one player just really gets annoyed and upset, and he stands up and he starts screaming at players. And when the dressing room became quiet, he said, "Yesterday I spent the day with my dad, who was in a hospice, and he's not going to live much longer. I promised him we'd win. I promised him I'd bring this cup in, and you cheated me out of that, and I'll never forgive you for it." Instantly, everything changed. It was no longer about game plans or tactics, and it wasn't even about beating the opposition. A new why entered our dressing room, and it became something where everybody could commit to on a human basis. And we went out and we just tore and overcame and refused, for someone that we deeply cared for someone that we deeply loved, to have that taken away from them. It just wasn't going to happen on that day. So for me, it is that why. And why do we play sport? Why do we try? Why are we willing to fail? Because no effort is failure. Because I can't not do this. For some people, it's singing. For some people, it's climbing a mountain. For some people, it's playing for their county. For some, it's I just can't do this. If I don't do this, I'm living with an amputated soul, and I'm not prepared to be that person. I can take the loss, I can take the media, I can take what people have to say, but what I can't take is living the rest of my life with an amputated soul.
You've worked with a load of teams who have been successful, and like obviously there's some teams that probably don't want the rest of the world to know that you are working with them, but I know Munster Rugby comes up and the Tipperary Hurlers come up and the Galway Footballers come up, and they're all very different, you know. Some of them come from a tradition of success and are trying to get back there. Some of them have had recent success, some of them have had recent failures that you've had to deal with. I guess they're all completely different challenges, and yet the fundamental is, what are we all trying to achieve collectively? And once you collectively define that and make sure that everybody has to do their own individual part of that, is that always the thing that unlocks the group?
Yeah, I think so. Obviously, every team has, every sport has a different culture. So if you're dealing with hurlers from Tipperary and Galway, so the idea that I would bring one culture or one plan into any dressing room and just replicate it, that's absurd. So you wouldn't do that. You work with the culture and identity and the philosophy that's in the room. But at the same time, I've three pillars that I look at, and one is, team resources, and that is game plans, tactics, how well schooled are we, how well drilled are we. That has to be done. But every team does that. Then I look at people. So the second is, how ignited are the people? Are they energised? Are they engaged? When you look in someone's eyes, have they that sense of excitement, that sense of madness about them? And then second, on the third pillar, is team cohesion. Are these guys willing to face up to anything for each other? Not to win, and very seldom do I ever talk about winning. I've very little interest in cups and medals, and I've even had beautiful signed jerseys that have been given to me over the 10 years from World Cup, Olympic winning teams, and I never even got them signed because that's not that important. It's the memories of what those people were willing to do for each other. That's what it's about.
You talked about the madness in people's eyes. There's definitely a point though where people get too mad and they get to that high-pitched state and their energy dissipates, or it causes them to commit errors. How do you, having done all the months and months and years of work of grounding them and getting everybody into the collective, those last 15 minutes or that second half, where if everybody went out unified after the guy talks about his dad in the hospice, some people might take that wrong and go and try and kill the opposition and give away a penalty or whatever.
And Alan Quinlan has always been open, and even recently open about the work I did with him was helping him to breathe, helping him to enjoy the process, helping him to enjoy the build up to the game. So in every sport, even in boxing, you get a minute rest. What do I fill that minute with? What do I fill that 5 seconds? So we would have reset routines and triggers that we go through, and they're simple. They're around breathing, they're around body language, and they're around using repeated thoughts that are all emotionally loaded. And you'd be amazed, as a human being, that's the way we're conditioned. So once you have your simple triggers developed, whether it's on the bus into the stadium, whether it's in the stadium, whether it's in the middle of the game, whether it's before you step up and take the all-decisive free, there is again, even at that point, you own your mindset, you own your emotion, you own your breathing and your body language. So always start and rebuild from there. And even with the boxers, in London Olympics, I suppose, which is a very successful Olympics, people were bowled away by the Irish boxers and how much fun we're having. And even straight away when Michael Conlon won his first Olympic medal ever, which was a great achievement, his interview, he couldn't wait to play a joke on the RT commentators. And when they said, it must be great to win a medal, he said, well, it's great because he was like a dog all week. Who's like a dog? Scooby-Doo. That was the fun. That's, and people think about competition has to be anxiety based. It has to, absolutely doesn't have to be. If you know you've trained well, if you know deep in your heart and soul that this is what you were born to do, this is where you were born to be, and that nothing in the world would take you away from this opportunity. Who wouldn't want to play in a Heineken Cup final? Who wouldn't want to play in Croke Park? Who wouldn't want to wear the county jersey? So it's just about how you frame these situations. If you frame it in a poor context, it's stress-induced, it's stress-giving. So you reframe it in a correct way.
One last question, right? So we're obviously talking about the elite of the elite, the Munster team who wins, Alan Quinlan, who scores one of the most important tries in Irish rugby history, Michael Conlon, perhaps and hopefully potentially our greatest ever boxer. For the day-to-day, for plebs like us who are going about our daily business, this stuff works as well, right?
Are you human?
Well, I hope so.
Absolutely it works. Because so are they, and that's what I work on. You asked me at the start, what's my job? maybe I'm just a human spiritualist. Maybe that's what I do, because I work as much on the spirit as I do on the mind or the body. But when you awaken the human spirit, which every single one of us have, the very fact that you learn to walk, you learn language, you learn numbers, the very fact that you dare to love means that you can embrace any situation. So it's about how you frame things, and it's also about the stories you tell yourself. So plebs like us, that is not a story you should be telling yourself. You know, we all have this incredible human spirit, and you either, you know, the words you use become the house you live in. So how do I describe myself? How do I think of myself? Because right now, the words I'm using and the thoughts I hold are creating pictures of my subconscious about what's possible. And once my subconscious creates that picture, that's exactly what I'm going to find. That's exactly the limit I'm going to arrive at. I really believe the limits of our subconscious, or the limits of our belief, are the limits of our world.
Gerry, we're out of time, but that's great stuff. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks very much. Pleasure.
Looking forward to hearing more from Gerry at Outdoor Revolution. It takes place in the RDS on Saturday and Sunday from 10 to 5:30 on both days. You can check out outdoorrevolution.ie for more details.
OTB AM. In association with Air. Get Air Sport free with Air Broadband.